Hugh Hewitt, joined by Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. Good morning, Congressman. How are you?
Good to be with you, Hugh. Sorry about those Browns. Last place in the AFC North. That's got to hurt. That has got to hurt.
Congressman
Meanwhile,
Gallagher,
Packers 5-1.
The number is 10. What does the number 10 signify?
I don't know where this is going.
That's the number of playoff losses by Brett Favre for the Packers. He also lost one as a Viking, but Brett Favre lost 10 playoff games. Baker Mayfield has only lost one, and already people are comparing him with two dislocated shoulders, popped back in and playing to the new Brett Favre. I'm not worried about the Browns at all, Congressman. We got Brett Favre's soul is living in Cleveland.
Brett Favre's soul will always reside in Green Bay, Wisconsin, despite a brief detour to the Vikings, which we've forgotten about.
That's what I'm saying. When he went to the Vikings, he loosed his spirit animal upon the world, and it ended up with Mayfield. I'm telling you, it's Brett Favre. So, Congressman, I'm very happy this morning for a very weird reason. Tom Friedman writes a column warning about China in the New York Times. A lead story in the Financial Times says America's political class is divided from its business class over China. And Ellen Nicholson, I say it wrong, in the Washington Post front page, we're in a Cold War with China, basically. Do you think the other side has woken up to the fact that we're in the second Cold War?
Well, I think the Chinese Communist Party is making it very hard to ignore that fact. And what's interesting, I wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed arguing that we were in a new Cold War with China last year. And I pointed out, in part, that the pushback is always from the Chinese Communist Party. They say we have a Cold War mentality. And I think they get so exercised about this because they don't want us to realize that we are in and act as if we are in an existential competition. They'd rather us default back to the cooperative framework that allows them to advance their military program, that allows them to advance their Belt and Road agenda, that allows them to practice economic coercion and global united front work. Meanwhile, we pursue naively grand bargains with the Chinese on things like climate change or stability on the Korean Peninsula or non-proliferation, all of which they have been bad actors on. And so, yes, we are in a new Cold War. That does not mean it's identical to the old Cold War. As we've talked about, what makes this in many ways more complex than the old Cold War with the Soviet Union is that our economies are so thoroughly intertwined. And that's why one of the biggest steps we need to take is to selectively decouple our economy from China's. And this, I think, is where there's still a divide within the parties right now. I think the Democrats are unwilling to do some very important things because of their donors on Wall Street and because of their natural constituencies with university endowments and state worker pension funds. We need to be prohibiting university endowments and state and local pension funds from investing in China in general and China tech in particular. And we need those on Wall Street who are lecturing us about global ESG investing to recognize the hypocrisy and the fact that China stinks on the E, the S, and the G. And if the G stands for anything, it should stand for genocide. But Larry Fink and BlackRock and others on Wall Street have yet to grasp that basic fact.
I don't know that Silicon Valley gets it either, from everything that I've read. The Congressman, in the aftermath of the public knowledge of the hypersonic launch on a Long March missile, meaning that we are a step behind. Now, your friend and colleague, Senator Cotton, did not seem as alarmed as many other people I'm talking about. Maybe you also are less alarmed because maybe we're not as far behind and there isn't the missile gap that I think exists there. We're about to spend another $2 trillion minimum, maybe 1.9 at the low end. Can you get any of your Democratic colleagues to spend any of this on strategic defense, whether it's Columbia class, whether it's opening shipyards in Maine? Angus King, put up your hand. Whatever you guys did in the solarium, you ought to be able to get that all funded in this bill. Where is Angus King?
Well, one bright spot in the House Armed Services Committee, we did have a pretty strong bipartisan vote to raise the defense top line. Remember, the Biden administration submitted a defense budget that was completely inadequate, that would have cut the Navy, that made no strategic sense. And as I wrote about in the Washington Post a couple weeks ago, my concern is that now the new forthcoming Pentagon strategy, Secretary Austin's forthcoming national defense strategy, is going to be based on this concept of integrated deterrence, which is really a vacuous buzz phrase that's intended to act as a smokescreen for cutting hard defense, cutting conventional deterrent capabilities and strategic capabilities as well. That being said, on the committee, there are some Democrats like Elaine Luria and others who were willing to vote with us to raise the top line. That's a good thing. I would say when it comes to hypersonics, I guess I didn't hear what Senator Cotton said, but I'm very alarmed. I do think this is a Sputnik moment. The fact that they have had hypersonic weapons for the DF-21 and DF-26 for years, while we're still years away from initial operating capability when the Army gets its weapons, should alarm all of us. And for your listeners, Hugh, I know you know this, but what makes these weapons so dangerous is not just that they can fly fast, it's that they can maneuver while flying very fast, which completely undermines our early warning systems, our homeland defense. We're not just talking about their ability to threaten Taiwan, we're talking about their ability to threaten ports in America, major American cities. So we should be alarmed. This should be a wake-up call, but instead we seem asleep at the wheel, and the Biden administration is simply not attacking this with the urgency that we need.
I should say, Senator Cotton is alarmed. He is not surprised. That's how he presented it to me. Yep. But he's on the Intel committee. So I want to ask you, Congressman, do you think, what percentage of people in Wisconsin think it's even possible that they might wake up some morning to learn that 100 hypersonic missiles had hit every carrier that was deployed, all the boomers that were above water and port facility, and that the Chinese were not expecting a war? They were just expecting a strategic strike at our defenses, non-nuclear. What percentage of Wisconsinites believe Pearl Harbor of the 21st century is real?
You know, Hugh, I fear that it's a very low percentage, 5–10%. And honestly, I think particularly those in the financial community, particularly those in the business community who are making money in China, look at the risk of a confrontation over Taiwan, and they consider it a very distant tail risk. When I sort of say, hey, you got Admiral Davidson saying this thing's going to pop off in the next 6 years, the CNO agreed, as did the Commandant of the Marine Corps. They tend to dismiss that as just kind of the ravings of national security hawks. I think that's misguided. I think particularly after Xi Jinping pockets the massive propaganda victory of hosting the Olympics in Beijing in a few months, I think things could get very, very testy over Taiwan. And I think we need to do a better job of making the case to Wisconsinites as to why this matters. I was actually in the Capitol.
Do you believe, Congressman, I want to interrupt you for a second. Do you believe, however small the probability, that there is a potential for that kind of a surprise attack on America's strategic assets that the CCP would consider short of war? It's the Stavridis scenario. It's what 2034 is all about. The limited strike that just sort of cripples America's will. Maybe a carrier, maybe more carriers, maybe all carriers. Do you think Xi thinks that way?
I think the most likely strategy they're pursuing, as Bridge Colby, I think, lays out very well in his book that was just released, Strategy of Denial, is a fait accompli strategy. So essentially they move very rapidly.
Sun Tzu, right.
Exactly, to establish facts on the ground before we can do anything, or pursue very creative measures like over a period of a couple months, flying in, people on civilian airlines into Taiwan, kind of a quasi Little Green Man scenario. But in either scenario, I think they will be able to very rapidly move, overwhelm our early warning systems, and overwhelm Taiwan's indigenous defense systems, and that could get very risky.
I'm not talking Taiwan. I'm talking Pearl Harbor. And for my youth, we all grew up thinking that was possible. I don't remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that's second grade. People thought that was always a possibility, however remote, and that you had to prepare for that little probability. I think the difference between Cold War I and Cold War II, that Americans don't think about preemptive strikes anymore. They just don't even believe it's possible.
And I think, there's this quote from the Korean War where General MacArthur is talking to the Senate, and he says, it's wrong to believe that war can be applied in a piecemeal way, that you can make half war, not whole war. I think we tend to think that they'll engage in some sort of half war, but I'm not sure that quite is getting it right. I think you could expect in a confrontation with China that if deterrence really fails, they'll wage a whole war. Now, it may not be a nuclear war, but it will include shutting down exports of critical goods. It will include attacking our critical infrastructure with cyber weapons. It'll include spreading disinformation on social media to destroy our will to fight, to say nothing about the conventional threats that you outlined to American carriers and ships and things like that. I think there is almost nothing that she wouldn't do to effectuate unification of Taiwan with the mainland. Even if, as Oriana Mastro and others have written, even if it results in him giving up half or more of the PLA's Navy, he's willing to pay a high price.
I believe that is correct. I believe that's correct. But I also think he has a goal beyond that, which is the Finlandization of the world. The way that he's Finlandized Hollywood, the way that he's Finlandized Silicon Valley. He's a genius, by the way. I'm not taking anything away from Chairman Xi. But do you, with the sort of the advent of a recognition that there's a second Cold War, does the American media understand, last question to you, understand Xi? I think this is the whole key. One guy can do this.
No, and I fear throughout the pandemic, the legacy media in America has been acting as useful idiots for the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, you have people, Chuck Todd and others, praising early on in the pandemic the way the Chinese handled their pandemic response.
Yeah, but Chuck is now a realist. I talked to Chuck. He's now a realist. I think all the big media is a realist. I don't know if our audiences, though, are aware of what that means.
Yeah, and I think people in public office need to do a better job, myself included, of connecting what can seem like abstract concerns about Taiwan or Xinjiang province, the Uyghur Autonomous Region in Xinjiang, to everyday life of Wisconsinites and even Ohioans going forward, and why this is something we all need to be worried about, and why you should be offended when a hostile foreign power is able to coerce major American industries, whether it's the NBA or Hollywood, right? I mean, that should offend every single American. We need to mobilize in a bipartisan fashion Americans to start taking charge of the situation and invest resources in our defense before it's too late.
Very quick last cheat question. Senator Cotton brought to my attention what I did not know, that every major news organization in the United States has a complicated relationship like Hollywood's with the Chinese Communist Party. All right, do you agree with that?
I do.
Wow. You see, I just think even hawks like me are aware of the wake-up call that came with the hypersonic, and I hope good luck to you, but go get some money from your friends, because the Democrats are going to spend $2 trillion, not a penny for defense, but trillions for Green New Deal. It doesn't make any sense. Congressman Mike Gallagher, remember the new Brett Favre is named Baker. It's Baker Favre. Talk to you next week.